For Global Business Updates, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. This is a Monday, the week beginning, obviously, after the Chinese Parliamentary Congress over the weekend. And the markets are trying to work out where China's actually going because its growth targets are relatively modest. And also, of course, it's a week very, very full of important data, not so much from China, but more from the United States. So we get the jobs figures and also we get some manufacturing figures today as well. So basically fairly mixed as far as Asia Pacific markets are concerned. Let me give you some of the detail of what happened over the weekend. So the growth forecast is around 5%. They say very much, this is China, very much around 5% for their growth. Last year, their target was 5.5%. The actual growth in the economy in China was about 3%. The Prime Minister is going to be replaced by Li Qiang, who is a former party secretary in Shanghai, very much a presidential agreement kind of person. And it's expected that what the business actually wants out of this is some kind of regulations that's going to make the anti-COVID lockdown dissipate more quickly, and also cutting red tape for businesses as well. They'll be waiting for that. It was announced also that defence spending has increased by 7.2%. That's £185 billion worth of defence spending. And the word war came up in the communique, if my Mandarin translator is correct about that. But again, it's just strengthening defences, but you can't help thinking that Taiwan is somewhere within that kind of equation. Now, as far as mobile phones are concerned, I think we're seeing the beginnings of the foldable phone era, I think, and a lot of companies, particularly Honor and Oppo in China, are chasing Samsung. Samsung was the first really to come out with the foldable phone. That is something which, whether or not the price of these phones will be accepted by people and what their actual overall use is, still a bit of a mystery. But that's what's happening as far as mobile telephony is concerned. Let us turn our attention to the United States. Stock futures moving very, very slowly, really overnight. Again, I was saying to you that we're going to get jobs figures. We're also going to get growth figures from the United States this week as well. And we get the factory activity figures after the bell on Wall Street today. So that'll give us a clue about where interest rates are headed. One person who's been outspoken about this, the governors of the Fed have been, the various governors, the regional governors of the Fed have been talking as they normally do. This is Mary Daly, who is the San Francisco Fed governor. And what she's been saying is, I think we all know this really, the interest rates will be as high as they are, maybe getting higher for longer. So the cost of borrowing is going to remain fairly high. And I think what we're seeing now really is a global repricing of loans as a result of not just her, but the general picture in the United States. The ECB is joining in with this really. Christine Lagarde, who is the president of the ECB, has been saying that the ECB needs to, as she puts it, do more to combat the inflation monster, as she describes it. Now, whether this means a further sharp rise in interest rates is unclear. Does it mean interest rates will remain relatively high for longer? I think it probably does. As far as the UK is concerned, inflation also getting in the way of one of the key Conservative Party manifestos in 2019, saying that they would build 40 new hospitals. Well, only 10 so far have received planning permission, and inflation apparently is getting in the way of these large public infrastructure projects. So that's, again, something which you need to build in. If you're thinking about investing in that sort of thing in terms of UK infrastructure, think about inflation as well, because it's cutting the way that's going at the moment. And UK strikes, as far as ambulance strikes are concerned, those have been called off for the moment while there is discussion. If you remember, the Royal College of Nurses called off their strikes as well. So, but of course, this is very much dependent on what they're being offered. And finally, oil. I'm not going to bother you with the oil price, particularly this morning, but more generally, if I were a news editor and I were in charge of people with a lot of access to the oil markets, I'd be trying to work out what's actually happening with this so-called shadow Russian oil fleet of tankers. Lots of rumors swirling about this. A lot of rumors that the Russians have been in buying up older oil tankers and setting them free to try to beat the oil embargo. That's fine, but what they're obviously not getting is insurance because of that, and the Russians are being forced to sell their oil at a cheaper price. And BP finally on oil is saying that it is still headed for its transitional targets, and it's not taking advantage so much of the rising oil price. It's still spending a lot of the money it's getting from that on its transition from fossil fuels to something slightly greener. That's the global view this Monday morning.
All right, real quickly, Michael, good to see you again. I've been trying so hard, to be able to talk to you about this, but probably because of the elections. I saw the Irish deal, the Irish, border deal. And isn't it just funny how shambolic politicians think, and they think people will not find them out? Is that not just still like the Irish backstop? Because I don't see a difference between the Irish. And when you see Rishi Sunak and his triumphalism that we've solved the problem of the Irish border crisis, I shudder. And I'm like, what is going on here? Is that not still the backstop?
Well, I think you're talking about the Northern Ireland.
Yeah, the Northern Ireland deal.
Yeah. Okay. So what's happened, I think, is that a slightly less bombastic approach has been applied to Europe, which Europe quite likes. And remember, these discussions started 2 or 3 years ago, and certainly Boris Johnson found that there was a lot of restriction about the way in which the EU would join with him in terms of discussion. I think Sunak's just taken a different kind of view. Whether or not this is ceding too much to the European Commission remains to be seen. But it does look as though some kind of movement has actually happened here, and it's quite sensible. What it basically means is that there are green channels for regular exporters to Northern Ireland, like Marks and Spencers and the supermarkets and so on. But others will have to go through red channels, a bit just like you do when you go through customs at an airport. You either go through a green channel with nothing to declare, and you take your chances if you have, and you go through a red channel with something to declare, and you actually declare it and pay tax on it. What I think was trying to happen here was a reduction of red tape and a reduction of the friction that this border been left over. Yes, certainly I agree with you. Certainly left over in the rush to, as it were, get Brexit done, as Boris Johnson was always talking about. And now the detail of it appears to have been tied up. All I can tell you is that Northern Ireland retailers are regarding this as a shaft of light. And that really is what it all boils down to in the end of the day.
Well, very quickly, Michael, just to touch on this Welsh ambulance strike being called off as they progress talks with ministers. What impact would that have on the junior doctor strike meant to come up between 13th and 15th for 72 hours? We had the nurses, we had the Welsh ambulance, and now the doctors. Do you think they would also call off their strikes?
Well, I think that the junior doctors will. I mean, they're rather confusingly and rather stupidly, they are a separate department from the nurses and the ambulance drivers. That's just the way that the unions have split them. And as far as the junior doctors are concerned, I mean, you wouldn't want their hours, would you? You wouldn't want the kind of lifestyle that they supposedly enjoy, which is practically nothing. I would, however, say that I'm sure that no junior doctor goes into that system without understanding completely that the first few years are probably going to be, I can't describe it as anything other, because I've got friends who've done the same kind of thing, as a sort of living hell. I mean, you are on call 24 hours a day, and sleep is at a premium. I mean, that's the way it is. What the future will be, I think, is, I mean, I hope is that the health service and the health secretary will come to some kind of terms with them. But I would not be, as a politician, throwing money willy-nilly at the National Health Service, because that's been done in the past. That gets votes, but doesn't do the National Health Service any good. And more importantly, it doesn't do the patients any good. What the National Health Service still needs to do, whether it be ambulance drivers, nurses, junior doctors, senior doctors, consultants, administrators too, is to talk about delivery, not input, but output. In other words, what are we actually achieving as a result of all this money going in?
Well, China setting a target of 5%. Well, isn't that playing safe? Apparently, with increasing domestic consumption and the post-COVID restriction regime in which they have found themselves, probably they will even exceed that 5%. But it's good to play safe, I guess. However, another thing that came out of that, the two sessions yesterday was the decision to increase defense spending by 7.2%. But the premier, who is going to become the prime minister, says, oh, this is a demonstration of commitment to peace. However, when the Americans increased their own defense spending for fiscal year 2023, they were very clear that this is to checkmate Chinese and Russian capabilities. So who is China deceiving, saying that they are increasing defense spending to promote peace? And then Bank of Japan, Kuroda, presided over policy meeting on Friday. The Bank of Japan is still insisting on its ultra-loose policy and the yield curve control. But investors and markets are saying, look, that has created too many distortions, and they want it to go. They want a revision. But the reality is that Ueda, who will take over in April, during his parliamentary hearing proceedings, said he will keep the ultra-loose policy for a long time. Why are investors so jittery about the choice that the Bank of Japan continues to insist upon?
I'll deal with the geopolitics in a second, which I don't really know a great deal about. But as far as Bank of Japan is concerned, investors here are saying that they're pretty confident that behind the scenes, what's trying to be engineered here is a very soft landing. Remember that it's been many, many years of ultra-loose monetary policy in Japan, which is now being gradually reined in as inflation starts to rise. But they've got to be very careful about getting too worried about inflation in Japan, because what they've been suffering from is an older population, of course, and also deflation over the past decade. So I would suggest that all I can go on is reflecting what investors think here and internationally, and the general thought, as I understand it, is behind the scenes, what's trying to be engineered, never mind what's publicly said, behind the scenes, what's trying to be engineered is a relatively soft landing. As far as China's concerned, your guess is as good as mine about that. Do you believe that the figure of 7.2% increase in spending, that comes to, what did I say? That comes to 185 billion pounds worth of extra spending on defence? Yeah, of course. The word war. The word war certainly occurred in the communique. Whether that means war against Taiwan or whether it means strengthening their role, because they do understand that their position is one of the second largest economy in the world, and they feel as though they want to increase military spending because they lag behind the United States in terms of percentage of GDP applied to military spending. But as far as China's intentions are concerned, your guess is as good as mine, I'm afraid. And until we know, and I suspect it will be a very, very rare event to find out whether or not China is in fact backing Russia against Ukraine and the rest of the world, I simply don't know. And I suspect nor does anybody else, apart from the president of China. And at the moment, he's not saying anything.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning to all our viewers. I'm channeling the spirit of Mr. Emmanuel Ifeni here. A couple headlines from Sunday, actually yesterday, in the Tribune and Daily Post. Traders defy the Supreme Court and reject old notes. Also the Tribune, business owners, churches refusing to accept old notes in Kaduna. We're seeing a lot of that with respect to how they've been reacting to this particular old notes. I mean, it's just something that we've seen as a trend going over the weekend. So that's that. We move to Flutterwave. And Flutterwave has put out a notice to a number of its users, stating that their accounts were not hacked on, I think it was over the weekend. So there was a lot of talk with respect to Flutterwave being hacked and losing about 2.9 billion naira. And they said that they were going to have to reach out to a number of banks to get them. And now it turns out that that's not the case. What Flutterwave said happened was that they carried out a routine check across a number of their accounts. And with respect to those accounts, they found out that there was, according to them, some unusual activity on some consumer accounts. And they said that the unusual activity was due to some customers not fulfilling, or rather not carrying out some security checks on their account, basically. And so as a result of that, it made those accounts pretty vulnerable. So there's been no hack. Flutterwave said that all customer funds are safe. And there has been, what's been going around as far as the hack is concerned is not true. They basically said there was a transaction monitoring system that they had implemented and made sure that, all accounts were safe. So it's just routine. That's pretty much all they said. And I'm not sure where this popped up that they had been hacked, but they've emphatically denied it and said that all their accounts are safe. If you think about cybersecurity, you think about where we are in today's day and age with a lot of transactions going electronic. It's important that these companies come out and put safety, or rather put out confidence in their structures so that people know that their transactions are safe. Because this is a unicorn. We're talking about a lot of people migrating over to electronic transactions with respect to what's been going on as far as currencies are concerned. And then finally, Zenith Bank, this is something that Dr. was talking about on Friday. This was about the central bank putting out that notice about, executives at deposit money banks and also executive directors and non-executive directors on boards, not exceeding tenors of 10 to 12 years. So later on that day, later on Friday afternoon, Zenith now puts out this notice that they've gotten approval in principle from the central bank to transition into a holdco structure. And a holdco, of course, is a parent company that has interests of its subsidiaries. You've got a number of verticals from banks to other fintech and so on and so forth. Also, in the notice that they put out to the NGX, Jim Ovia, who of course is the chair of Zenith Bank, will now become the chair of the holdco upon approval. Now, of course, this is coming on the heels of the central bank putting out that notice that your tenure should not exceed 10 to 12 years. Now, Doctor, remember you were asking about whether or not, Segun Agbaje of GTCO will be affected, Herbert Wigwe of Access Holdings and so on and so forth. They won't, because they are chairs of the holding structures. This notice from the central bank is particularly for the banks. And that's our update for us.
I was shocked that even Zenith Bank is coming this late to the holdco party.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because it's quite unusual. I thought Zenith will, jump on this long ago. But the holdco structure has always worked. Pretty much worked with GT. Pretty much worked with Access. It's now Access Corporation, and it's something that is getting on along. And it also helps them to be able to iterate across board. So even if the new law comes in, these guys still pretty much own majority shares in their banks, and they can still, navigate the waters and all of that. But I think the bigger conversation is the fact that, compared to where we're coming from in the early 2000s, Nigerian banking system has really, pushed its own weight around, and it's getting way better. Not like the time where we used to have over 100 mushroom banks here and there, goodness me, and all of that. As regards Flutterwave, they have to put more security in place, but so I think what they did predominantly was a stress test. So you do that from time to time as regards customer account, and you have like a test through what is really happening. And when you cite activities here and there, then you should be able to flag it. I think it was TechPoint that took the story, but TechPoint also said at the story that they were going to wait for an official statement from Flutterwave. So when Flutterwave released an official statement, I think pretty much that's to cool down the market, because you don't want to run on the market at a point in time like this. And also kudos to Flutterwave. Their founder the other day was ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, Indeed, for Founders Day of African origin. And it's an African unicorn.
Indeed.
3 billion and still waiting. It just shows you that that's what Nigerian youth can do when they harness their resource. I just hope we get a leader that is able to help them harness this resource.
Indeed.
A quick one on the Flutterwave issue. So the reason why there's a bit of a contention, despite their statement, is that we had seen the letter by their legal counsel, Albert Onimole, to the Deputy Commissioner of Police reporting this incident. Like what Rufai said, in terms of strengthening their security processes, which some people have talked about. Glad that it's flagged up, but some people on Twitter came out to say that their accounts were affected. So despite what they're saying, but the question I was going to ask you, Rotus, is in the event that this happens, because in the report, the police are unable to freeze these accounts. Why is this so? Why are they unable to freeze their accounts? Is there a special provision for?
Well,
or,
if you're going to freeze accounts, it's not going to be through the police. You have to, that's going to be get court orders. You got to go through the financial system, through the banks.
so that's a long process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, but the truth is that some people have said they are unable to access their accounts anymore. Some people have also alleged that they lost money. So all this, I think Flutterwave, while it is good that they are trying to build confidence and trying to assure their customers that no funds have been lost, where they need to do a lot more in terms of investigating the complaints by those persons who said that their accounts, have been affected. So it's not enough to just build confidence. Do they stand the risk of their accounts being hacked? Because what they said they observed was a series of unexplainable, transactions on their platform. And then they quickly checked, they reported to the police, they took steps. But, I think those who do business with them, we need more clarity in that regard. As for Zenith Bank getting an approval in principle to be an holding company, well, they are following in the footsteps of GT, in the footsteps of Access, right? However, yesterday, I discussed this matter with Johnson Chukwu of Carry Access on This Day Live.
Yes.
And the point that he made was quite interesting. He said he thinks it's a good policy. That if a man has been a director in a bank, in a financial institution for 20 years, after 20 years, it's time to move on. And that the CBN was perfectly in order. Now, after all, if you became a director at 40, 20 years later, you're already 60. 13 years ago, the limit was 10 years tenure. Now, it's been extended to 20 years. And he said the problem is with owners, owner directors. Now, those owner directors, even when you say they can no longer be directors, after 20 years, they will find a way around it. So this holding company strategy looks like a way of circumventing the CBN policy.
And they might.
And it's only the owners that can do that. Jimovia is an owner director. So holding company, most of these holding companies, they are not necessarily financial institutions. They are into tech, they are into all kinds of businesses. So there is no way the CBN can say, oh, you are strictly a financial institution because it's a holding company with other, businesses under the platform. But clearly, the people who will be able to do that and get away with it are the owners who are also directors. And that's what we have seen. But how the CBN reacts to that remains to be seen. But with the established precedents, I think they will get the approval eventually.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rotus.
Thank you so much.